We're at our American Rescue Plan Committee meeting of Thursday, June 16th. This is an open meeting. I don't see anyone in our audience, but it is being recorded on YouTube. First thing we'll do is establish a quorum. And we do have, I will say this, we have two online, I believe. We have Dustin Meeks, our legal counsel, and John Rogers. So I'll call John Rogers first.
Here.
Thank you. Misha? Troy?
Here.
Scott? Thank you. And I am here as well. And as I said before, we do have our legal counsel on the phone if we need anything there. So our first item is to approve the minutes from January 3rd. I believe everyone has a copy of those, and have you had a chance to review? Are there any additions, corrections, or a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We will have to do this online since we have a member virtually. So John?
Yes.
Scott?
Yes.
Troy?
Yes.
Misha? And me, yes. All right. So our main item of discussion today are the nonprofit applications. And as we discussed, and that includes in our minutes, we were going to take these 2 weeks to further evaluate the supplemental applications and putting that with the rubric for us to come up with these actual numbers that we will be recommending to council for approval. So, not meaning to put anyone on the spot.
Yeah, before we get started, let's get this conflict of interest before I weigh in on anything
Oh, yes,
else.
okay.
Hey, Dustin,
Yes.
so for the record, I know you know this and everybody in this room knows it, but I'm on the board of directors for Student Impact, which is one of the non-for-profits being evaluated.
Correct.
For my evolution, I did not evaluate, nor will I make any recommendations for donations or contributions to Student Impact. But should I be recusing myself from this entire process or just any conversation around Student Impact?
The Code of Federal Regulations identifies that you should not participate or be involved in monitoring any contract in which you have a conflict of interest, and so ultimately there is not a conflict in the contracts that will be entered into with the other nonprofit organizations. So insofar as you might comment on the merits of entering into agreements with any other applicant for funding, I don't think that is an issue under the federal guidance related to conflict of interest, particularly because you do not have a conflict with any of the other nonprofit parties.
Okay, appreciate it.
I also wanted to mention that Jake German is on as well this afternoon. So.
Oh, he is. Okay. I did not know that. Yep. Hello, Jake.
Hey, Cindy, how are you?
Great. Appreciate you both being on this call. As you know, we want to make sure that we are within the program guidelines here and that we are adhering to the federal guideline process as well. So, Scott, since you were already talking, why don't we start with you? Because I know each of us was going to be putting out some numbers and justifications, of course, let's make sure we're aware that we are still using the rubric information as the basis for moving forward.
Yep.
Okay.
So just how I evaluated this from my perspective, I went through and looked at all the different pieces that they were asking funding for. A few of the things that folks asked for, I didn't agree that was something we should be funding based on conversations we've had. So I scratched those items and then came up with a formula for a multiplier for those that aren't 100% in Westfield. So my goal was to fund 100% of the ask for Westfield-only charities or non-for-profits, and then those that service other areas, I use a funding formula to try to pare that down. And through that process, I got to a number that was fairly close to the target that we were trying to hit. And I'm more than happy to deep dive into what those things were, but just purely from a numbers perspective. And then the other piece to it is my goal, I know everybody may not agree with this one, but if they made it through the rubric scoring, I wanted to see at least something donated to that non-for-profit, because I think they're all making impacts in our community, and wanted to at least try to come to the table with something for each one. So the numbers I came up with, I had Grand Universe at $27,000. I had the Westfield Education Foundation at $58,000. I had Trinity Free Clinic at $42,100. I had Young Life at $30,000.
Wait, can you slow down, because I
Yes,
am
ma'am.
putting this, Trinity at 42, then,
$42,100 for Trinity. Young Life is at $30,000. Westfield Youth Assistance I had at $178,700. And Heart and Soul I had at $61,750. And I did not evaluate student impact.
I'm sorry, what was Grand Universe?
27,000.
and Heart and Soul again?
61,750.
What's the total of all yours?
You know, Troy, I had that at one time. It comes right around close to 400,000 roughly. I think it's a slightly over 400,000, but I can add that back up real quick.
What did you have for Westfield Young Life?
30,000.
So that's 396?
397,550.
Okay.
Total.
So the remainder be student impact.
Will not comment. But yes, that is the artificiality of what we're doing, is there is a gap, and obviously one that's not being commented on, so.
Troy, do you want to give yours too, and we'll just go
Yep.
down the way, or?
Yeah. So I did similar to Scott Willis. I mean, this is where it's kind of interesting. You know, I mean, because I went through the applications and kind of tried to delineate what everybody wanted, and then what it was qualified for. And the one thing that kept coming back to me as I was going through everything was, we have two healthcare companies, and regardless of whether one serves 50% Westfield or not, in fact, the total volume of Westfield citizens is greater than the other one. So even though one's 100 or one's more Westfield, it's, you know, I mean, for me, it was, I looked at several different variables. So I'm just going to start off by stating this, and then I'm going to actually argue against myself in a second, because I'm just so good at arguing anyways. So Trinity Free Clinic and Heart and Soul, I'd give them everything they asked for. The 199 and the 90. Without hesitation, I have no problem with that. This is the dilemma that you know, that I faced. I went through the 990s of the tax returns, and obviously we didn't have some of them. You know, I mean, and by the way, I did not give any to Grand Universe because I didn't feel it qualified. But this is even with the healthcare companies too. So I mean, I was kind of like trying to justify this in my own mind. When you look at the 990s and you look at the net assets and the income and expenses of all the companies, a lot of these companies are much better off than they were prior to COVID. In fact, financially, they're vastly better off. And I'll give you a student impact as an example. They're 20% better off. I mean, if you go through their 990s, they actually made more money, raised more money than they ever did, even without other assistance. And I think Trinity might have been the same way. I mean, and some of the others. Now, with that being said, some of the people didn't include all their information, and you know, I mean, we got an email from one of the people, and I think they're correct by saying, if you didn't give us the information, then why should you even get anything anyways? Because we actually even said, if you didn't give us the information, then there's no need to even respond to the rest of it. I mean, so, you know, I'm a little torn on that. That's what I'm saying. I'm having like internal crises among myself here.
Well,
But,
Troy, what was forwarded to us for this exercise was not the initial part of the application. It was just the supplemental, basically.
but some people didn't provide information. A good example is Young Life. I'm not saying it's not a valid organization. They didn't give the information, you know? I mean, it's that we even asked for. And that's, I mean, you know, I'm just saying, it's great to give something to everybody to make everybody feel good, and it makes us feel good. But at the same time, I just think of, you know, what we were really intended to do and who's actually interacting with the public and the greater good of the community, and I just keep thinking that the healthcare companies are that Trinity and Heart and Soul, we should give them everything they asked for. I mean, whether some of that stuff is or isn't, I mean, again, I'm going to argue with myself, Cindy. So, I mean, some of the stuff we said, hey, we weren't going to give them money for this, or, you know, whatever, and there's certain things in there. So, anyways, I'm just going to leave it at that. I mean, and I went through and I looked at the rubric, and again, I'm going to say this again, the rubric, although I think it was a good starting point, it was faulty, because you could, I actually figured out, I could have created a bounce gymnasium and would have qualified and had the most points. Because I could have said, well, I was opening it up for COVID, and we're going to give kids an opportunity, and this and that. I mean, literally, I could have gotten the maximum points. I mean, in Westfield. I'm just saying, if I had a 501c3 at the previous time, and I went through all the steps, I was like, it's just, I know I'm just talking, so whatever. Okay, I'll stop. But I'll just go through the numbers, okay? So Westfield Education Foundation, I couldn't pull all their information, so I'll reserve right to change my mind on this. But I was going to say it's about $40,000, and that was looking at some of their information here. And by the way, my numbers won't add up to 500. Young Life, I had at 2,600 or 2,500. Again, Trinity Free Clinic, I had the full amount, the 199,971. Westfield Youth Assistance, I had at 58,500. If you go through a lot of their information, it actually had nothing to do with anything what we were talking about, at least from my perspective. Student Impact, I gave 7,050, and Grand Universe 0, and Heart and Soul 90,000. So that again, I mean, and by the way, I'm going to say this. I think Student Impact does some good things for the communities and good things for the kids. I'm not interested in giving them money because their rent went up and they want to offer more basketball scholarships.
And just because I'm on the board, I'll say this, and then I'll shut my mouth about Student Impact. We are outside of fire code right now. We have so many kids coming into Student Impact, we are outside of fire code for that space.
Yeah.
So Student Impact does have a capital campaign to try to raise money to add on to the back of the property to be able to accommodate the flood of kids that we've seen. And a lot of that is a result of COVID. So yes, we've been aggressively fundraising. Our numbers are up. We have a better board than we probably had in the past. But the money is not for basketball rent going in. Actually,
It actually says it in there.
well, we just negotiated, the rent's flat. We got that flattened out. There's no increase to the rent. There is a lot of things Student Impact's doing, but
I
that,
don't know that you should be talking about this since it's
Okay.
part of it.
Well, I
I'll be
think it's
quiet.
I mean,
I'll be quiet.
I know, but I'd like to hear what he says. I mean, even though I'm
Okay.
probably going to disagree with him, I mean, in their application, it said for rent, you know,
I didn't see the
for
application, so-
basketball rent.
Yeah, I didn't see the
Right? And I'm like, what? I mean, you know, stuff like that. And the other thing is, to it's to replace a fundraiser that we never had and we never had to begin with. I mean, but we could have had one had there not been COVID. But we didn't have one before, and we didn't have one, I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's like, and that's like $100,000. I mean, I'm gonna give you $100,000 for something you didn't have before. You may have not had it in COVID anyways, but now because you're looking back, you're saying, yeah, we could have done it had we not had COVID. That's just, anyways. I just keep coming back to looking at the healthcare companies and saying, that's where I think the best use of the dollars are. But again, mine don't add up to 500 so, you know, for me, I would take the rest and I'd put it back to the projects because I think that, again, is for the greater good of the community. But anyway, I'm gonna say one more thing. Student Impact didn't ask for money from ARPA from the county. And I'm not asking you to comment on this, Scott, but, you know, it's like, why? Because they said they serve Westfield. Well, Westfield's in the county. I mean, why wouldn't you ask? I mean, if you really needed money, you would have asked for it. I mean, that's just, and I'm not, you know, I'm a little torn on that. I mean, and, you know, again, I'll probably make everybody mad by.
Well, and the other thing that I'll add, and I hear everything you're saying, Troy. You know, one of the things, and when I looked at Trinity and Heart and Soul, and I struggled because I wanted to give them more as well. But when I looked at how much ARPA funding they had gotten from the county and PPAP and some of the other things that were available, I felt like reducing their ask, because some organizations, a lot of these in Westfield, got nothing. And I don't know the criteria at the county level. I don't know what they had laid out and if there was a reason. I wasn't on the board when Student Impact, when that program came out. So I just don't have any data to share. But I used that to kind of weigh into how I was balancing this because they had access to other funds and received ARPA funds from other programs, so, or other entities, so.
Anyways, I mean, that's what I have, so.
Cindy, you want to share yours?
I'm sure I'll get a bunch of nasty messages in my email box. Sure. It's a common occurrence.
So I will put mine out here. So Westfield Education Foundation, 40,000, Westfield Young Life, 15,000, Trinity Free Clinic, 80,000, Westfield Youth Assistance, 200, Student Impact, 97,000, Heart and Soul, 68. I think that was my numbers. Let me double check.
Nothing for
my
Grand
numbers.
Universe?
No, and there was nothing for Grand Universe.
So that adds up to 7, okay, great.
And does anyone want me to explain any of those right
Yep.
now?
Yeah.
You do? Okay.
Just to put you on the spot.
Well, with, I know you're interested in both the healthcare ones, obviously. So Heart and Soul also does serve people outside of Westfield too, you know.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
I wanted
think it
to
said in their thing they
be
did.
fair about that.
Yeah.
And Trinity, you know, before the pandemic, it was about 21%, I believe. And during the pandemic, it's been up to 39% that are Westfield, Washington Township, I believe. But so I wanted
not
to
a- it's not
address that
perfect,
in
yeah,
there. And they
yeah.
also, I mean, they both did receive different amounts, and I have those detailed in other assistance. So Westfield Education Foundation, and it's tricky because some of these things are pass-throughs.
Yeah,
And they do then provide the contributions to the other ones that have also
right.
benefited and asked for funds. So it's a little bit tricky with that one. But one thing I couldn't get on board with was us paying for the comedy event.
Right.
And while it's great, and I mean, all of these things are fantastic, I mean, everything about what all of our nonprofits do is incredible.
Yeah.
So I don't mean to downplay that. I just didn't think that that was necessarily consistent with the goals
I
of
agree.
ARPA.
Yeah.
So I kind of had to address that in that number. Youth assistance program, that's one it's tricky because, I mean, the city is already supporting, of course, with staff, and they need additional staff now to be covering a lot of these additional tutoring costs. That's one of the big things for them. So, so they want to add the staff, and they're asking for $146,000 for 4 years. But the other thing was the mental health, the tutors, the camps, $58,000. But then they want this vehicle and the costs associated with that, it's $174,000. I don't know how comfortable I feel about the whole vehicle program.
Yeah, no,
The transportation program, I get that it was needed before potentially, and it's probably needed now at some level, but I don't know that it's something that this program should necessarily be covering. I just kind of have concerns over that, and we've talked about that before in this group. So my number there generally takes that into account.
and I apologize, by the way, to anybody that's here or listening. I don't mean, when I ask questions, I'm not trying to pinpoint anybody, right? So, Cindy, and by the way, I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with Cindy, but tell me the first part. I mean, walk me through that first part of the youth assistance, what they're asking for. I get the 58.5. The first part, you on
The staff?
the staff for 4 years, because I went through that and I'm like, I don't know. I mean, this doesn't feel like. I mean, anybody could have put, hey, I need to pay a staff for 4 years.
Right. And again, I went back to the rubric first.
Or even if Scott.
And again, I'm putting
Same with
stock
Scott.
in
If
this
Scott has the
rubric
same
thing,
thing,
okay?
I'm not-
So when I'm
Yeah, I got
erring and
one,
I'm thinking, I need to make a decision, I'm looking back at the rubric saying, wait a minute, this high-scoring situation here
Yeah.
of all the goals that we had in our rubric. So bringing it back to that, I was concerned about adding a staff person for 4 years. But now, they do have the actual increase in need, and they've been demonstrating that. And especially with the tutoring,
Yeah.
and they can't seem to handle all of that with their current staff. And because then that is related to the pandemic and the learning losses.
Is that the same with you,
Yeah.
Scott, on that, or no?
No, that was a little bit different. So I did agree to the programming staff, just because I thought, when I looked at the financials, that they could absorb that over time with the support they get from the city and from the fundraising. I know the mayor does. I agreed with 2 years' worth of programming for mental health. Boy, I can't even read my writing, but the camps, the tutoring, the clinics, all that stuff I funded for 2 years. And then I did fund for the vehicle, but I didn't fund for the driver or the insurance or anything like that, because I felt like that was a bit outside the scope, but I felt the vehicle was a necessary addition based on the demand for their services and the kinds of people they're servicing. So that's how I came up to 170.
As you can see, we all have different ideas and whatever, so, I mean,
These numbers are gonna be all over the board.
yeah.
It really will
I
be.
mean,
Well, Scott, you and I were kind of close on this one. Obviously not for the Troy
And it's
end.
funny, because our Westfield education came to the exact number, but I funded something you didn't, and you probably funded
That's what I'm
something I
saying.
didn't.
That's
So
what I'm saying. I think you
Yeah.
guys both you came up with a similar number, but you both funded different
We
pieces
funded
of
different
it,
pieces of it, that's right.
the vehicles and stuff like that.
We have not yet heard from Misha and John.
Yeah.
To me, I'm from represent the school treasurer. Just whatever you guys decide, I feel like should be just a recording for whatever numbers you're giving to us. That's
So you don't have
That is the
specific
easy
numbers.
way out.
yes, because I should not jump into my figures in there.
You would give everyone $1 million if you could, wouldn't you, Misha? We all would.
My job is for clerk treasurer office. I just come here to figure the right place.
Okay.
John Rogers.
Yes. I depended a lot on the matrix, and I also But I agree with a lot of comments you've made, and everyone's made, I should say. But I really did lean towards some of the youth aspects, and probably not just in the framework of ARPA, but in the framework of the long term. And this is an opportunity. I think the term you used in the very beginning was to make a real to make a significant difference. And so I'll just real quick, I had 120 for youth assistance, 90 for student impact, 75 for the free clinic, 75 for education foundation.
Wait, hold on,
75
slow down. Westfield
Okay.
Education Foundation is what?
75.
75,000 for the Trinity Free Clinic,
Yep.
75,000 for the Education Foundation.
Wait, go back to
75,000
Trinity, I'm sorry.
75,000.
Oh, they were both 75, okay.
Yeah, 75,000 Heart and Soul, 30,000 for Young Life, and 30,000 for Grand Universe. It's not quite 500,000, but again, I leaned towards the youth. Although I do agree with several of the comments made about healthcare, and I probably pushed that higher than I intended to, but they also scored very, very similar in the overall process, at about 15% of the total score possible.
Well, there you have it. 4 different numbers for every single group.
See,
So do we average these up and see how close we get to 500, or what are we doing here?
Well, what's the council want to see to vote on?
The actual numbers that we're recommending funding for everyone who met the application guidelines and that we're
Agreed.
recommending for,
Agreed, but do they want any of the backup that we've covered today, or are they just show us the numbers and then we're going to vote?
that hasn't been discussed specifically. They're looking for our recommendation.
Okay. Well, I was just going to Troy's average. I mean, we could just average them if the backup is not as important as just the number.
I guess the problem we're going to have with that is Troy's didn't have the 500, and mine don't either because I didn't evaluate student impact, so.
I mean, it did because
Technically.
by doing everybody else
You only do
except
it by
for them
3,
and
yep.
leaving that amount
Yeah,
out,
good
yeah.
point, yeah.
But I would agree. I mean, if we wanted to be sticklers and we said, well, Scott then says 0 on student impact, that's not fair either if we're going to do an average. Even though I don't agree with the number, I'm still saying I don't know if I would agree.
We just divide them by 3 instead of 4 and everybody else by 4.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, we're supposed to give a recommendation. I don't know if, I don't want to keep belaboring the point either, truthfully. But send it to and Cindy, this is your committee, so I should just let you do it, and then that way I'd be like, see, Cindy's the one who said it, so. Give it to the council and say, this is what we have. Because they may have their own thoughts.
Well, but primarily the goal of this group was to actually furnish our recommendation for the actual
right.
funding.
But they didn't have to accept it either. They could make any adjustments.
That's true.
That's the.
Well, one way to approach this is that I can put these numbers in a table for the council to consider and then average them out so they can see what that amounts to in an average situation. But, I don't know how helpful that's going to be for them because they're still going to be in the same position we are right now, if that's
Yeah, and
the
they don't
case.
have any of the data that we've had.
And then it brings, again, that subjectivity into this, that we were trying to keep this as, obviously, as objective as possible.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I mean, you know, looking back, hindsight is 2020, but I'm not sure who you all represent, because I hate to tell you, so I don't remember. But, so if I offend you guys, I'm sorry. But I wish the healthcare companies would ask for 500,000 apiece, because we kind of gave money based on the asks and wants instead of the possible needs. I don't know. That's just my thought process. When I was going through them all, I'm like, well, gosh, they should have both asked for $500,000 and then just laid out all this stuff.
Well, again, the goal of this program was to actually be covering the losses, you know, and going back to payroll and benefits and all that, and then addressing the revenue loss, and especially when it's increased need, and that's where we have then the situation with a lot of these.
But is one of you from Trinity? Okay, sorry, I'm going to throw you under the bus just a second, but just ignore what I'm saying. I'm just going to say, so look at Trinity and look at student impact, right? If you look at their 990s, they both are more well off now than they were before. Their net assets have grown. You can tell me I'm wrong or give me your rationale. Yeah.
Can you come to the microphone so it's
Sorry.
on the record?
Because I tried to go through them.
And I don't have the financials in front of us, but we, through the CARES Act at the beginning of the pandemic, we got a mobile unit that was, you know, $400,000.
Yeah.
So it looks like we had $4,000 more in revenue than we did. We actually had to go into our reserves more than $300,000 to meet service needs during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So our net loss, it's outlined in there.
Yeah, I saw that. I just went to the 990. And
Yeah. Oh no. I know. There's I tried to put a line in but I don't remember which part of the application
Yeah.
that indicated that you know it looks like it's $400,000 more because it you know
Yeah.
it does not reflect our cash situation. That includes that $400 gift when you look at the 990.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah.
No, I
So,
appreciate that. I mean that's
We had a loss both years during the pandemic, and you know
Right.
we applied for everything that we could to help
offset.
close that gap, just like everybody is doing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
again, I know you guys all have a really hard job.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but sorry, I did want
No,
to
that's
put
okay.
that one out there.
I appreciate that.
Thanks.
I always like to hear people. I mean, okay, so you understand what I'm saying? I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
so for instance, and again, I'm going to pick on student impact, Scott. So, I mean, but we're giving them everything but the fundraiser that they never had and possibly could have had there not been COVID. I mean, by giving them 90,000, you're giving them everything they asked for. Except for the fundraiser that they never had before, that they didn't have anyways. You know?
Yeah, they were caught, and I think, and this is coming from an outsider, I'm obviously not on the board, but just being familiar with everything that was going on there, they're in a growth phase. I mean,
Yeah.
the program has grown
Yeah.
so much, and not just because of the pandemic, but I think, again, it's exacerbated by some of it. But again, just the growth in our community.
But if you look at all their history, they're growing anyways.
Well, exactly.
mean-
So that's the challenge, right? And how much of that is attributable for a group like
Yeah.
this, you know, to the pandemic versus just general growth.
Yeah.
And I think that's two different things, but,
Well, if we just move the ball forward here, I just did some quick math. Not saying we have to do this, but if you take the average on all the scores, you basically have Grand Universe at 14,250, Westfield Education at 53,250. You got Trinity at $99,268. Young Life at $19,375. What is WY? Not student impact. Westfield Youth Assistance, sorry, I can't even read my own writing. 139,300. Heart and Soul, 73,688. student impact is 64,683 for a grand total of 463,814.
And
And
I
something,
appreciate that. I just, again, I feel like lobbying for the healthcare companies. I mean, it's like, I mean, they're the ones who are actually freaking even doing COVID tests. And I mean, you know.
yeah, no, I don't disagree, but I guess where I might deviate from you in that regards is the healthcare companies had a surge because of COVID, and that should be trickling back to normal. The impacts that COVID has had on our youth is not going away. This is an impact that I think we're going to be seeing for years to come. And I think some of these groups like Youth Assistance, Student Impact, Young Life, Westfield Education Foundation, I think they're going to be in the fight for a lot longer than and I'm not minimizing what our health clinics went through, because certainly they were really impacted by COVID.
I mean, the kids are getting back to normal. They're all doing their normal things. I'm not saying there's not kids with some mental health impacts to COVID, but I mean.
Troy, make sure you speak into your microphone. It's hard for
I'm sorry.
for
I'm
the
sorry.
recording.
Yeah. So, okay. I just feel I feel remiss if I don't push for the healthcare companies. I just I don't know. I mean,
Well, there are two of our three biggest, no, that's not true. Yeah, they're two of our three biggest donations is to the healthcare. It goes Youth Assistance, Trinity, Heart and Soul.
do both Trinity and Heart and Soul offer mental health? Okay. What do
One
you
of
do,
the
Cindy?
One thing we haven't talked about.
I'm
so-
trying to, and again, the healthcares, they offer mental health resources too. And a lot of the other things are addressing, when you look at youth assistance and Young Life and all that, they also speak to well-being and the social and emotional and all these other kind
Yeah.
of well-beings. And so there's that health piece with the pandemic, but then there's that broader piece too. Obviously, both incredibly important.
I didn't preclude them from money.
Right.
I mean, I just,
Right. Right.
One of the other things we didn't talk about, but, staying below the 500 number is something we need to think about, because, Jake, are you still on the line?
Jake unfortunately had to.
Okay.
step
So
away.
Dustin, I was talking to Jake the other day, and he mentioned that we will have a responsibility to audit and track how these companies are spending their money, how these non-for-profits. And whether we do that within the council or outsource that to somebody who's going to monitor that, there could be an additional cost associated with this that we really haven't talked about.
I
having
hate
some money-
government bureaucracy. I
do
cannot
too, but-
stand the government.
Well, wait,
And I'm part of
I'm
it.
a bit, like, I'm confused about that, and maybe legal can talk about this, because Dustin also mentioned with this being grants, and we're not contracting with them to provide a service, this is a straight grant. I mean, they have to comply and not have conflicts and all these other things, but how much oversight after we do an agreement with them is there on that?
So generally speaking, the sort of the contours of managing the city's relationship to the beneficiaries of the grant program, and Cindy is right, the recipients of money here are going to be beneficiaries of the program and not sub-recipients. So important to remember that the oversight piece does not extend to ensuring that these organizations comply with the uniform guidance on federal awards in their expenditure of funds, because you're not providing them money for them to undertake any specific purpose. And so the grant agreements are not going to lay out any specific purpose other than identifying the impacts that the organization has suffered and appropriate proportional responses to those impacts as the guide for these organizations in the way that they use their grant funding. So because they are beneficiaries, the oversight that needs to be done is sort of prudential primarily, and that is in tracking the way that the funds are spent and ensuring that the funds are spent within the program period, and that the city receives invoice information from the grant recipients about the items on which the grant funds were expended, and those will not be reported to Treasury, those invoices, but they will comprise a piece of the city's record of the wider ARPA program, and what the funds were used for. And it just will be important to have those, or it would be prudent to have those in the event of a future audit, to say, these are the nonprofits that we provided funds to, responding to these identified negative economic impacts or impacts of COVID-19, and these were the items that our beneficiaries expended the funds on in response to the impacts on their organizations, and here are the records. So the grant agreements that we have generally proposed for local units undertaking a program of this size and scope, what they essentially point to is you have identified an impact. Here is the approved set of uses for the funds, things like payroll and covering your rent and those sort of costs, operational costs of the organization. And then usually there's a section on a reporting schedule about sort of regular reports on the level of expenditure of the funds and on what the funds have been expended on, and then providing those invoice records. And then there is a component about award closeout when the full amount of the award is expended, or when the grant program period has expired, and that sort of unexpended funds at the end of the grant program period are to be returned to the city.
Is that, can I ask, is that subject to the end of 2024, like the other stuff, unless it's encumbered for a storm, the stormwater stuff that can be encumbered for, what, 2 years
So,
later?
When you provide the grant, that is considered an expenditure for purposes of the final rule. So no, so they do not, the beneficiaries do not need to have expended all of the funds prior to December 31st, 2024, because from Treasury's perspective, the city spent the funds when you provided them to the beneficiary. The reason that you would have a particularly identified program period is in part, I think, reinforcing that this is a program responding to immediate needs. So the money should be expended on responding to negative economic impact that the organization is suffering, but also to ensure that there is a clear program closeout date, at which point the city can say that the grant agreement has come to an end because the grant funds have been expended on an appropriate.
It would just basically end there, they wouldn't have to report back on any of it to us anymore.
Right, yeah, and at which point all of the grant funds should be expended.
Right.
So, I think Jake has jumped back on.
Yeah. Hey, Dustin, thank you. I just wanted to add on the program management side. I know Dustin had kind of gone through the ARPA guidance and what's required. The only thing that we've been seeing in the market that I wanted to bring to the group's attention is that sort of the accounting of how these funds, these dollars are actually being spent by these nonprofits, whether it's required under ARPA or whether it's questions that come up about how these funds have been spent into the future, meaning that, we're all accountable to, the citizens and everything like that, that there's questions about how these nonprofits are spending these funds. And while the application, the question that we've gotten is how do we make sure that Dustin's friends nonprofit is spending the money on what they pledged to us they would do, right? And so we're seeing more and more more and more groups, some different cities that are doing nonprofits that they wanted some kind of accounting measure to be able to see invoices, to be able to see how these programmatic dollars are being spent. And when Dustin and I were meeting this week to kind of run down through some of the ARPA projects and things, I've been discussing what's the best path for that, and we've seen some groups have are having their process or their program looked at by like an accounting firm to make sure that these dollars are being spent appropriately, and it creates a report. And so if you ever get questioned about, well, what did nonprofit A spend their money on? What did nonprofit B spend their money on? Especially if you're appropriating, if you're granting money to groups, that there is some question about are they spending it on, I don't know, rent versus expansion versus healthcare, or what does that look like with mental health, or whatever they tell you they spend their money on, you want to make sure that they're doing that. So that was just a point I wanted to make today. I thought it was an appropriate time for the group to hear about that because of where you're at with the nonprofit piece of it. So I know Dustin kind of went through a portion of it, but I just wanted to mention that to the group to see if there were any questions about what that would look like, or anything about ultimately what how that fits into sort of your overall plan for these dollars.
Jake, with only 6 or 7 applicants here that we're looking at, is that really a significant endeavor?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Cindy. I mean, in the dollar amount too, I mean, it obviously depends on, some communities have started to give out millions of dollars to their nonprofits. We have a large community in Southwest Indiana, one community in Northwest Indiana that's established pretty significant nonprofit groupings. The only piece of mind that when Dustin and I had sat down and talked about this was that because of not the subrecipient, or the nature of not being a subrecipient, and really as a granting this money as a portion of economic loss or economic hardship, just figuring out if you ever got asked later on, even if it was by the citizens, about, hey, what did this nonprofit actually spend this money on? Or what was the benefit, to the community, the overall community, something like that. Just making sure that you have information on that. And if it's only 6 or 7, you may be able to just manage that, right? You may be able to ask them for obviously invoices, but yearly report on how these funds are spent. And with, I apologize, I didn't hear kind of all the numbers, but with, some groups only receiving a few $1,000s and then up from there, you may be able to just manage that and ask them for that. But I at least wanted to bring it to your attention that that for larger sums of money, it may make sense.
Okay.
I have a question. Okay. If we city gave the money in period of the 2022, and of this $500,000 to each group, maybe total group, but how about recipients as a grant recipients? Do they have to spend the money end of 2022? So because you say you have to have provide receipts, expenditure, how they spend, monitoring how they spend, that means that those recipients have to be spent end of 2022.
No. So Misha, when you're making the report to the Treasury next April about the nonprofit grant program, because the program will have sort of occurred in the 2022 early 23 reporting period. The report will be that the city, that the project was a nonprofit grant program, and the report, that any documentation sort of going along with that report will be information about the nonprofits, documentation of negative economic impact of those nonprofits, and the grant agreement between the city and those nonprofit organizations. The documentation would not be the information substantiating the expenditures by the nonprofits, because from Treasury's perspective, in terms of program implementation, here, when the city makes the grant to the nonprofits, it is spending the money on providing assistance to the nonprofits. The sort of the reason that we would make sure that there are records provided back from the nonprofits to the city is to ensure that the city has in its records information substantiating that the funds were used for the purpose for which they were intended, which is responding to the identified negative economic impacts on the nonprofit organizations. But in terms of your reporting to the Treasury, the reporting will not be about what the nonprofit spent the money on. The reporting will be that the city spent the money by providing it to the nonprofits in the form of the grant. Does that make sense, Misha?
Yes, so I was not asking about the treasury part, the reporting, that's a simple, under the $10 million, so the reporting, yeah, I understand that part. I was just talking about citywide recording, because when we have something, for example, we give some grants, working for grants for Westfield High School, some grants, we don't ask their detailed expenditure, how they spend the money. So that's what I'm trying to say. You're talking about how they spend the money. We need to find the recording how they spend on that one. They must have a time of a period, how long they've been spent, how long they can spend. That's what I say. But some of the grants we work for school, we don't request any receipts.
I think
How they send-
yeah, I think his answer is no.
Yeah,
mean,
so that's I
yeah.
try to clarify.
Yeah.
I would recommend that there is some point at which the city expects that the grant funds will be expended in full, and that there will be a final report of how the funds were expended, which may be different from grants that the city has provided previously that were perhaps more open-ended. But it doesn't. I wouldn't say that it needs to be this year. And in terms of recording the reporting back, I really just the reports are more for the city's records than anything. So in the file of records about the ARPA program and how the ARPA funds were spent is where I would file these reports.
I got it. Thank you.
Do you, Cindy? Or no?
I'm definitely not the expert on this topic, but I know for the county, the way, because of the amount of money they awarded, and because so much of it was reimbursement for lost revenue, not future projects, you do not have to do a report for the county ARPA funds.
Okay,
So just,
perfect,
again,
thank you.
but I don't know, like, that's a Dustin and Todd Clevenger. I think Todd, was that his name that was here before, Todd Clevenger?
Yeah, Todd Clevenger.
Okay, so, anyway, but I
Yeah.
don't know all the whys.
Thank you.
I would think that if you wanted to provide the money on a reimbursement basis, essentially the submissions for reimbursement are the report, because what a reporting on how the funds were being expended would ask is essentially, for substantiating the expenditures. So, and that's what your reimbursement request would have done in a reimbursement situation. And the final rule is agnostic on providing the funding on a reimbursement basis or providing it on a lump sum basis. So either the sort of the brass tacks of getting the money out could be done either way. It's really a policy decision for the city council, or this committee to make.
Okay.
Dustin or Jake, do you have, and this is probably more of a policy and not a legal one, but just because you guys have been helping out a lot of other communities, given the situation we're in and the difference of opinion, and also in light of our rubric, do you have any suggestion moving forward?
In terms of how to get the funding out?
Well, in terms of how do we actually get these numbers into a place, or do we let our council know our thoughts on each one and let them nitpick this? I mean, do you have experience with that in any other community?
I will say this is Westfield is I guess I'll say you guys are my favorite, because I'm sort of much more closely involved with the implementation of your ARPA plan than I am with most other folks that I work with. So this is not this kind of level or detail of question is not something that I have handled or addressed for other folks. And I think that it's really a matter of the committee's preference on, I think from a conflicts of interest standpoint, considering that situation, it could be helpful to, sort of make recommendations on each individual organization based upon, the individual merits of the organizations. And so, you can sort of, that can, I think it could be helpful in making abundantly clear that, each organization was evaluated on its own merits, and that sort of that evaluation was done by individuals who could appropriately evaluate each organization. I think that's one way that is a potential sort of way to do it, to ensure that we're being abundantly clear that the final rule was complied with, and that the uniform guidance related to the conflicts of interest matter was complied with.
Dustin, a question. I mean, I know Scott, he's already said his conflict of interest or whatever. But I mean, is it a conflict of interest if I'm in charge of a budgeting process and I'm assigning dollars to different groups, and now all of a sudden and I'm giving money, I'm now assigning ARPA dollars then to that same group? Is that a conflict of interest or no? If I'm part of the city, I mean, I'm just trying to think. As soon as you said the conflict of interest,
I don't think that the fact that the city has potentially given funds to any of these organizations in the past
they have.
creates an issue.
Okay.
Let me ask you guys this. Now, Scott, you went first, and now you've heard other numbers and other reasons for that, and going down the line, has anyone had any significant changes in the way they feel about one thing or another, with any new information from anyone else? Comments?
I don't have any issues with how anybody graded anything. I feel good about how I did it. I put a lot of thought into it, as I'm sure we all did. I made it pretty clear in the last meeting that, I was going to give preferential treatment to those that only service Westfield, for various reasons. And I know some of these other organizations got ARPA dollars and other types of funding from other sources, so I felt we needed to take care of our own. So when I evaluated the three, I think there's three that only service Westfield, I gave them, the allotment wasn't necessarily higher, but the multiplier brought their dollars down because of that. So I feel comfortable. I think, again, everybody's got their own ideas, and I don't think, I can't look at anybody's thought process and say that's messed up. I would say, though, if I could add, I think taking this to council as is right now, this will be a mess trying to figure it out. And they don't have all the data that we've been pouring over for months. So I do believe we've been tasked to bring the number.
I agree.
I think we hammer this thing out, and then individual council members want to call us and clarify, that's great. But I personally, if I was in their shoes, if you hand me that mess, I'm going to tell you, I need time to evaluate it, and now we're just continuing to kick these dollars down even further.
I agree with that.
So,
I think, and this is not a legal opinion. You know, maybe one way. I think the average numbers get you to like 460. Maybe one way to kind of get to a 500,000 number would be to look at sort of what percentage of the 460 that the average produces went to each of the 7 organizations, and then sort of multiply the remaining $64,000 by that percentage, and sort of allocate the last $64,000 in that way, and then you would have a set of numbers
30,
that
35.
that is $500,000 for the organizations, that sort of approximates.
yeah, we're off 36,000 roughly.
Sorry. So yeah, you could. That might be one way to sort of divvy up the remaining 36,000, and then maybe you're at a starting point to say, you know, what do we want to change within the 5,000 we have here?
I don't disagree with that, but I'm not saying we have to do it. But.
I guess that is a good place that we can at least put those numbers down and get them,
Yeah, even though we all probably don't all agree, I mean,
well, we could at least put that into the plan for the council recommendation and explain what we did and how we arrived at that,
you don't want to put any numbers in, Misha? You good?
and include the rubric. I want to keep coming back to this rubric. There was a reason that we did this. And so to provide our averages with also this information from the rubric and say, this is what we're suggesting, but this is, you know, obviously going to need to be voted on.
And
Thoughts?
yeah, no, and I'm quickly doing the math, but I don't think we have to quickly do the math because I'm afraid I'm going to make a mistake. Maybe what we agree to is the process, and then we go back and do this a little bit more methodically than the way I'm doing it right now, just to make sure we're not making any mistakes. But if the group agrees to that, then I would say we just vote on the process, that we're going to take the averages, whatever the shortfall is, we're going to take the percent that each organization got, we're going to multiply it times the shortfall, and we'll add it back to everybody so that we come to an even 500,000.
Since I'm not involved in numbers, but four of you, numbers, all just put it in down, see what, I mean, all both of the figures are together, you maybe catch something. Some numbers maybe pops out, instead of, oh, we agreed that, when you look at the 4 figures, usually some is a combination, or some numbers that you will be identify something really closer. So I think maybe that's a good idea to look at the average comes with the 4 numbers. Look at maybe easy to target.
Yes, let's just take the amounts and the percentage or whatever, and
And if you guys want, I'm good at spreadsheets. I can put this together, capture it, send it to the group, have everybody check their numbers to make sure that I copied it right, check my math, make sure it's right, and then we can agree and then just enter it into the meeting minutes.
yep,
And then we can share that. Cindy, you can
Sounds
share that
good.
with the council.
sounds good.
I think that is probably the most prudent way to go at this point.
Okay.
And it moves us forward, and that's what we
Yeah,
need to be
and then we're
doing.
done.
Do we need to
Justin,
make-
Jake, do you have any thoughts about that?
I think Jake had to hop off again, but that seems like a good, a decent process to me. But that's also not a legal opinion. But that,
I just want to make sure we're not legally doing anything wrong there. At least we know that much.
No, we're good.
Do we need to vote on that, formal vote?
Yeah, I was going to actually take the vote on that.
So I'll make the motion that I already made. Do I need to go through that math again, or is
Nope.
everybody clear
No,
on it?
you're good.
Okay, so that's my motion.
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion from Scott and second from Troy.
Hey, John.
and-
You need to turn on your camera for voting.
Okay.
John?
I'm turning it on.
Your vote, sir?
Oh, yes.
Misha? Troy?
Yep.
Scott?
Yes.
Me? All right. We're all in favor. So thank you, Scott. You will get that out to us.
I'll do that today.
And that will then be in our meeting minutes
Yes.
on record. And also there's the recording of this meeting if anyone needs to reference that as well.
I'll try to get that out to the group today, just because we've got a city council meeting coming up and I don't want to delay.
And from there, just so we know next steps, we would want that forwarded to the council.
I'll leave that up to you as the committee chair, if you want to forward it. But yes, I agree. They should have
That
that.
should probably be yet another vote to actually officially
Yes.
issue a recommendation.
Oh, in another ARPA meeting?
Well, that's the thing. We don't have the actual table in front of us to forward the,
Yeah, but we have
We've
the,
agreed to the process.
we agreed to the process.
right.
I'm fine with that. Well, I don't think we need to have another meeting. I think we agreed to the process.
But I mean, do we need a formal action to forward this with our approval to the city council?
Oh, we can take a vote on
I
that
would
too.
say that you should, that if the committee was going to make a formal recommendation to the council, that the committee should vote
I
to
re-
approve that.
I'll make a motion to recommend that we move the amounts that we all agree upon, that Scott's gonna do the initial calculation. We're all gonna check it, check our own calculations, and submit it to council.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. John?
Yes.
Misha? Troy?
Yep.
Scott?
Yes.
Me, yes. And do you have that motion down for the minutes?
Yeah, just typing it now.
Okay.
I'm not texting, I'm actually working.
All right, I wanted to make sure that you're actually getting that for the minutes.
I got
Okay.
it. Yep.
All right. Do we need to establish a next meeting date, or shall we wait until well, we will hopefully when we get our next disbursement, and then we'll work on the appropriation and updating our plan direct. Yeah, but we don't have it yet.
Yeah, to be determined.
At least Misha's looking at me like she doesn't have good news to say, hey, we got that money. Okay. Okay, so we won't schedule next meeting date yet. I'll put out something and notify publicly when we actually get that appropriation and ready to schedule something. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second, I'll second. And John?
Yes.
Misha? Troy?
Yes.
Scott?
Yes.
Me? Yes. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. The appropriation.